Welcome back everyone, and thank you for tuning in today, because what you are about to hear will challenge everything you think you know about pocket change and hidden treasures. Today we are diving into one of the most fascinating and controversial stories in American numismatics, the legendary 1979 1-cent USA coin that some experts, collectors, and researchers believe could be worth as much as $44 million. A value that sounds almost unbelievable when compared to its humble face value of just 1 cent, and yet when we peel back the layers of minting history, production errors, metal anomalies, mint mark mysteries, and once-in-a-lifetime possibilities, the story begins to feel less like fantasy and more like a perfect storm of rarity, mistakes, and timing that could elevate a tiny copper coin into one of the most valuable objects ever struck by the United States Mint. So let's settle in as we explore how a single 1979 penny could theoretically reach a valuation normally reserved for priceless artworks and legendary jewels, starting with the context of why the year 1979 itself occupies a unique place in American coinage history, because by the late 1970s the United States Mint was still dealing with the aftermath of the copper crisis, experimenting with metal compositions, struggling with worn dies, rushed production schedules, and unprecedented demand for small denomination coins, all of which created an environment where errors were not just possible, but increasingly likely. And when you combine that with the fact that pennies were struck in the billions, meaning errors could easily slip through unnoticed, you have the foundation for extraordinary anomalies to exist. And now imagine one of those anomalies being so extreme, so unique, and so historically significant that it becomes the sole survivor of a minting catastrophe, the kind of coin that collectors dream about and museums fight over. And this is where the 1979 1-cent coin enters the conversation, because while most 1979 pennies are common and worth only face value or a few cents in circulated condition, certain hypothetical and reported error combinations from this year push the boundaries of what is considered possible within US minting standards, beginning with the most dramatic and valuable scenario: a wrong planchette error involving a transitional or experimental metal composition, because although official records state that by 1979 the Lincoln cent was composed primarily of zinc with a thin copper plating, there has long been speculation that a small number of experimental copper or alternative alloy planchets remained in circulation at the mint facilities, particularly during testing phases or leftover stock mishandling. And if a 1979 penny was struck on a solid copper planchette matching pre-1982 specifications or even an experimental alloy never approved for circulation, that alone could make it a once-in-a-lifetime discovery, but the value multiplies exponentially when you add additional errors to the equation, such as a double strike with rotation, where the coin is struck twice with the die rotated at an extreme angle, producing overlapping images of Lincoln's portrait and distorted lettering that cannot be replicated intentionally, and if that double strike occurred off-center, leaving a portion of the planchette blank while still retaining a full date and mint mark. Collectors would already consider it extraordinary, but now imagine that same coin also exhibiting a major die cap error, where the coin became stuck to the die and struck repeatedly, creating ghostly impressions and dramatic metal flow lines that tell a story of mechanical failure frozen in metal, and then add to that a mint mark error so severe that it challenges the known minting practices of the era, because in 1979 mint marks were still punched into the dies by hand, meaning that repunched mint marks, over mint marks, and even mint marks from the wrong facility were theoretically possible. And one of the most tantalizing possibilities discussed among advanced numismatists is a 1979 cent bearing an impossible mint mark combination, such as a Denver mint coin struck with a San Francisco mint mark intended for proof coinage, or a mint mark punched over another mint mark in a way that contradicts official mint records. And if such a coin existed with verifiable metallurgical analysis and die matching evidence, it would not just be an error coin, it would be a historical anomaly that rewrites what we know about mint operations during that period, and rarity of that magnitude drives value beyond traditional price guides, into the realm of private treaty sales where prices are dictated by the wealthiest collectors on earth, and this is where the $44 million figure begins to make sense. Because when you consider that coins like the 1933 Double Eagle have sold for over $18 million with fewer combined errors and anomalies, and the 1794 flowing hair silver dollar has surpassed 10 million based largely on historical significance, a coin that represents an unprecedented convergence of errors, metal composition mistakes, mint mark impossibilities, and transitional year confusion could easily eclipse those values in a competitive market, especially if it were the only known example. And the story becomes even more compelling when we consider the possibility of a mule error, where the obverse and Reverse dies were never meant to be paired together because although mules are more commonly associated with modern coinage, the chaos of late 1970s mint operations leaves open the possibility, however remote, that a Lincoln cent obverse could have been paired with an experimental reverse die, perhaps intended for a different denomination or design test. And a 1979 penny bearing a reverse that does not officially exist would instantly become one of the most important numismatic discoveries in history. And value in numismatics is not just about metal and mistakes, it is about narrative, provenance, and the ability of a coin to tell a story that no other object can tell. And a coin like this would embody a story of human error, industrial pressure, and hidden history, all encapsulated in a piece of metal smaller than a fingernail. And collectors are willing to pay extraordinary sums for that kind of storytelling power, especially when authentication by top grading services confirms that the coin is genuine and not the result of post-mint alteration, because authenticity is everything. And in the hypothetical scenario of a $44,001,979 penny, authentication would involve not just visual inspection but advanced spectroscopy, X-ray fluorescence testing, dye state analysis, and comparison to known genuine errors from the same period. And if all of those tests confirmed that the coin was struck at the mint, using official dies, on an anomalous planchette, with impossible or undocumented mint mark characteristics, its legitimacy would be beyond dispute, and that is when the bidding wars would begin, because the pool of potential buyers at that level is small but extremely powerful, including billionaire collectors, sovereign wealth funds, private museums, and institutions seeking to own the ultimate conversation piece. And it is also important to understand that extreme valuations often depend on timing and secrecy, because some of the most valuable coins in history were not immediately recognized for what they were, instead passing quietly through hands until the right expert connected the dots, and a 1979 penny like this could have been sitting unnoticed in a collection, a drawer, or even a bank vault for decades, its true nature hidden in plain sight because few people would ever suspect that a modern-looking cent could rival the value of ancient gold coins. And that psychological barrier is part of what makes the story so captivating, because it invites everyone to re-examine the ordinary and question what hidden value might be overlooked. And while skeptics rightly point out that no publicly confirmed sale of a 1979 penny at $44 million has occurred, it is precisely that lack of public disclosure that fuels speculation, because private sales do not always make headlines, especially when confidentiality agreements are involved. And even if such a coin has not yet changed hands at that price, the theoretical valuation remains plausible within the framework of extreme numismatic rarity, and valuation in this field is often about what the right buyer is willing to pay at the right moment, not what a price guide says, and the mere possibility of a coin like this existing has already influenced how collectors view late 20th century coinage, encouraging deeper study of mint errors that were once dismissed as insignificant. And it has also led to renewed interest in searching through rolls of pennies, not because everyone expects to find a fortune, but because the knowledge that something extraordinary could exist makes the hunt irresistible, and that sense of possibility is the heartbeat of coin collecting, the idea that history, chance, and human error can intersect in a way that transforms the mundane into the miraculous. And whether or not a $44,001,979 1-cent coin ever emerges into the public eye, the discussion itself serves as a reminder that value is not inherent in face value. It is created through rarity, story, demand, and the willingness of people to believe that even the smallest object can hold immense significance. And so as you think about the coins you handle every day, consider the idea that somewhere out there, perhaps already discovered or perhaps still waiting, a tiny copper-colored disc from 1979 may be quietly defying expectations, carrying within it a combination of errors, mistakes, and mint mark mysteries so profound that it challenges the boundaries of modern numismatics and Ramin. Today we're diving into one of the most talked about and controversial stories in modern American numismatics, a tale that blends curiosity, controversy, imagination, and the tiny details that can turn pocket change into something that people whisper could be worth a staggering $214 million. And whether you're a seasoned coin collector, a casual viewer who likes mysteries, or someone who just emptied their change jar, this story is meant to engage your curiosity right from the start as we explore the legend, the claims, and the fascinating possibilities surrounding the 2012 United States 1-cent coin and why some believe that, under extraordinary circumstances, it could be valued far beyond its humble face value of 1 cent. Now, before we go deeper, It's important to understand that what makes this story so compelling is not a single confirmed auction result or a government declaration, but rather the convergence of error theory, minting anomalies, historical precedent, extreme rarity scenarios, and the way the collector market sometimes assigns astronomical hypothetical values to coins that combine multiple unprecedented mistakes in one single specimen. And that's exactly where the 2012 descent enters the conversation, because the Denver Mint in 2012 produced billions of Lincoln cents intended to be perfectly ordinary, copper-plated zinc coins with no special status, no precious metal content, and no expectation of becoming legendary yet. The world of coin collecting has repeatedly shown that when something goes wrong in just the right way, ordinary becomes extraordinary, and value can leap not by dollars or thousands, but by orders of magnitude, especially when errors are dramatic, unique, and verifiably authentic. The idea of a 2012 descent being discussed in connection with a value like $214 million stems from the concept of a hypothetical ultimate error coin, one that would combine multiple independent minting mistakes that are each rare on their own but nearly unheard of together, such as a wrong planchet error, a transitional metal error, a dramatic double die, a rotated or missing mint mark anomaly, an off-metal strike, and evidence of mint equipment malfunction, all occurring on a single coin that also survives in pristine condition and can be proven beyond doubt to have left the mint that way, not altered later. And when collectors imagine such a coin, they aren't thinking about everyday errors that sell for a few dollars or even a few thousand. They're imagining a once-in-a-generation artifact that would rewrite error coin textbooks and sit at the pinnacle of numismatic history. To understand why such a valuation is even discussed in theory, we need to look at how error coins have been valued historically, because the United States Mint has accidentally produced coins on the wrong metal before, such as cents struck on silver dime planchets or quarters struck on nickel planchets, and some of these have sold for tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars, not because of their metal content, but because of their rarity and the clear documentation that they were mint errors. And when a coin combines a wrong planchet with other errors like a dramatic off-center strike or a double die, the value can increase exponentially, not linearly, because collectors are no longer just buying a coin, they're buying a story, a singular event frozen in metal. In the case of the 2012 descent, one of the most talked about theoretical possibilities is a strike on an experimental or transitional planchet, such as a leftover copper alloy blank from earlier decades or even an unissued test metal that was never meant for circulation. And while the mint has strict controls, history shows that during transitions, mistakes can happen. And if a 2012 descent were somehow struck on a solid copper or bronze planchet of the pre-year 1982 composition, fully authenticated by metallurgical analysis and mint documentation, that alone would make it extraordinarily valuable. But when people speculate about nine-figure valuations, they go even further, imagining a planchet made of a metal never officially used for cents at all, such as a high-purity copper alloy mixed with trace elements that suggest experimental testing, or even a planchet intended for a completely different denomination or foreign contract, which would immediately raise questions about how it escaped quality control. Another layer of intrigue comes from double die errors, which occur when a die receives more than one misaligned impression during its creation, resulting in double design elements that are part of the die itself and not the result of damage after striking. And some double die cents, like the famous 1955 double die, have become icons of the hobby, worth thousands or more depending on condition. But imagine a 2012 descent with an extreme double die affecting the date, the motto, and Lincoln's portrait in a way never seen before, with clear separation and bold doubling visible to the naked eye. And then imagine that double die paired with other errors, which would push the coin into uncharted territory. The mint mark adds another fascinating dimension, because mint mark anomalies can occur in several ways, including missing mint marks, repunched mint marks, or misplaced mint marks. And while missing mint marks are common on coins that were never meant to have 1. A missing or malformed mint mark on a coin that should clearly show a D for Denver can spark intense interest if it's proven to be a die error rather than wear or damage, and some theories go further, suggesting a hybrid die scenario where a Philadelphia die without a mint mark was somehow paired with a Denver reverse or collar, creating a mule-like situation, which is incredibly rare and highly prized when authenticated. Then there's the possibility of mechanical errors during striking, such as multiple strikes, brokerage where a previously struck coin impresses its design onto another, or strikes through foreign material. And while each of these can occur individually, the idea of a 2012 descent exhibiting multiple such errors simultaneously feeds the imagination of collectors who love the improbable. and when people discuss values in the hundreds of millions, they are not talking about a coin that is merely off-center or slightly misaligned, they are talking about a coin that appears almost impossible under normal minting conditions, a coin that challenges assumptions about quality control and forces experts to reconstruct a chain of events that allowed it to exist. Condition also plays a massive role, because even the rarest error loses significant value if it's heavily worn or damaged. And the hypothetical $214,000,2012 decent is always imagined in near-perfect or mint-state condition, with sharp details, minimal handling marks, and surfaces that show the error clearly and cleanly, because top-tier collectors and institutions are willing to pay premiums for coins that not only are rare, but also present beautifully and photograph well, becoming centerpiece items in exhibitions and publications. Provenance and documentation are equally critical, because without a clear chain of custody and rigorous third-party authentication, even the most spectacular-looking error will be met with skepticism, and that's why discussions about extreme values always assume grading and certification by the most respected authorities, along with metallurgical testing, dye analysis, and perhaps even archival research to see if any unusual events were recorded at the Denver Mint in 2012, such as equipment malfunctions, experimental runs, or changes in suppliers that could have introduced anomalies. The number 214 million itself is often used symbolically in such discussions, representing an extreme upper bound, rather than a realistic market price, a way to capture attention and illustrate just how far removed such a coin would be from ordinary cents, and it reflects the idea that if a coin were truly unique, historically significant, and impossible to replicate, its value would be determined less by comparables and more by what the wealthiest collectors or institutions would be willing to pay to own a singular object, much like unique stamps, paintings, or artifacts that sell for extraordinary sums. Skepticism is a healthy part of this conversation, because the coin market is full of exaggerated claims and misunderstandings, and many people confuse common post-mint damage with genuine mint errors, or assume that any unusual-looking coin must be valuable. But the reason the story of a potentially ultra-valuable 2012 decent persists is because of the genuine unpredictability of minting errors and the documented history of astonishing mistakes that slipped through even in modern times. With advanced quality control, the Denver Mint produces coins at incredible speed, striking hundreds of coins per minute, and while automated systems catch most problems, they are not infallible, and when something does go wrong, it can go wrong in spectacular fashion, creating coins that are dramatically different from their intended design. Another factor that fuels speculation is the sheer number of collectors and the competitive nature of the high-end market, where owning the best or only example of a particular error can be a status symbol as much as an investment, and in such a market, prices can escalate rapidly when multiple wealthy buyers pursue the same object, especially if it gains media attention and cultural cachet. Cultural context matters too, because the Lincoln cent is one of the most iconic coins in American history, and any anomaly associated with it carries emotional and historical weight beyond its metal composition, connecting modern errors to a lineage that stretches today for a story that blends mystery, curiosity, and the fascinating world of pocket change into something almost unbelievable. Because in this video we are diving into a tale that begins with the most ordinary object you can imagine, a 2016 1-cent United States coin, and ends with a jaw-dropping valuation of $34 million, a number that seems impossible when you remember that this coin was meant to be worth just 1 cent. So settle in and imagine with me how such a tiny piece of copper-plated zinc could become one of the most valuable coins ever discussed, as we explore every possible error, mistake, mint mark, anomaly, and chain of unlikely events that could transform a simple penny into a once-in-a-lifetime treasure. And now let us begin by picturing the 2016 1-cent coin as it was intended to be, an everyday object struck in enormous quantities at United States mints and released into circulation to buy almost nothing, yet still pass through countless hands unnoticed. Because on the surface the 2016 cent follows a familiar design with Abraham Lincoln's portrait on the obverse and the Union shield on the reverse, a design introduced only a few years earlier to represent unity and strength, and millions upon millions of these coins were produced at the Philadelphia and Denver mints with no mint mark indicating Philadelphia and a small d indicating Denver, and on paper there is nothing special about them at all. But the numismatic world has always been driven by the truth that rarity and error can elevate the mundane into the miraculous, and the story of a $34 million penny begins not with intention but with imperfection, because the United States Mint is a massive industrial operation where speed, precision, and volume are prioritized, and while quality control is strict, it is not infallible, and throughout history some of the most valuable coins ever discovered exist because something went wrong at just the right moment and in our imagined yet plausible scenario. The 2016 cent in question was born at the crossroads of multiple catastrophic minting failures occurring simultaneously and compounding upon one another in ways that should statistically never happen yet in theory could happen, and that is where the fascination lies, because when collectors talk about errors they often mean simple things like off-center strikes, double dies or clipped planches, but the leap from a few $100 to tens of millions requires something far more extreme, a perfect storm of mistakes that rewrite the rules of rarity and value. So let us consider first the planchette itself, because before a coin is ever struck it begins as a blank metal disc, and in 2016 cents were made primarily of zinc with a thin copper plating. But imagine a scenario where a small batch of planches intended for an entirely different coin or even a different metal composition accidentally enters the cent production line, perhaps a bronze alloy test planchette or an experimental alloy never meant for circulation, or even a foreign planchette with an incorrect weight and metallurgical signature. And now imagine that this planchette is not just wrong but unique. Maybe it is composed of a metal that is not only rare but historically significant, such as a gold alloy intended for a commemorative or a platinum-based experimental blend used only in internal testing and never documented for cents. And already this single factor alone would make the coin extraordinary. Because a cent struck on the wrong metal, especially a precious metal, could be worth hundreds of thousands or even millions depending on documentation and uniqueness. But our story does not stop there, because now we layer on the strike itself and imagine that when this anomalous planchette enters the striking chamber, the dies themselves are flawed, perhaps catastrophically flawed, because dies are engraved with incredible detail and used to strike thousands of coins before being retired, and sometimes these dies develop cracks, chips or misalignments, and in rare cases they are hub-doubled, meaning that the design was impressed more than once at slightly different angles, creating dramatic doubling visible to the naked eye. And now imagine a 2016 cent struck from a die that not only has extreme hub doubling but also multiple breaks, cuts and retained fragments, creating a chaotic, almost sculptural appearance where Lincoln's portrait appears doubled, tripled and distorted. The lettering is shadowed and repeated, and the shield on the reverse is fractured and incomplete, and this alone would be considered one of the most spectacular error strikes ever known. But we are still not finished, because now consider the strike pressure itself, because modern coins are struck with immense force calibrated precisely for the intended metal and thickness, and if a wrong planchette of harder or softer metal is struck with incorrect pressure, the result can be a strike that is either unusually weak or impossibly sharp, capturing microscopic details never seen on normal coins. And imagine that in this case the strike is so sharp, so perfect, that it reveals die polish lines and micro-engraving artifacts that were never meant to be seen, creating a level of detail that borders on proof quality yet exists on an error coin never meant to exist. And now we add another layer, the alignment, because coins are meant to be struck with precise orientation, but sometimes they are rotated, and an off-metal metal strike combined with a rotated die alignment of say 180 degrees or an extreme misalignment could create a coin that defies classification. And now imagine that the coin is also struck off center, perhaps dramatically so, yet still retains the full date, mint mark and key design elements, making it identifiable as a 2016 cent while also displaying blank unstruck metal on one side. And now imagine that this off-center strike occurs not once but twice, because the coin somehow fails to eject properly and is struck again at a different angle, creating a double strike where two overlapping impressions exist on the same planchette, each with their own errors. And now imagine that one of these strikes occurs partially outside the collar, which normally contains the coin, during striking, resulting in a broad strike where the coin spreads outward, creating an unusual shape and irregular edge. And now we are dealing with a coin that has multiple strike errors combined in a way that numismatists would describe as almost impossible, yet theoretically within the realm of mechanical failure. And now let us talk about the mint mark, because in 2016 cents were struck at Philadelphia and Denver, and the presence or absence of a mint mark is critical. And imagine a scenario where a Denver mint die accidentally lacks its D mint mark due to a fill die or engraving omission, creating a no D error that should not exist for that production run. And now imagine that this no D error occurs on a coin that metallurgically matches Denver production yet lacks the mark. And now imagine further that microscopic analysis reveals ghosting or remnants of a mint mark that should not be there, suggesting that the die itself was altered or improperly polished, removing the mint mark entirely. And now consider the possibility of a transitional error, because transitional errors occur when the mint changes compositions, designs or processes, and old materials accidentally mix with new ones. And while 2016 was not a year of official composition change. Imagine that experimental planches or dies from an earlier or later year were present in the facility and somehow a die dated 2016 strikes a planchet composition that officially belongs to a different era, such as a pre-1982 bronze composition or even something older like a wartime steel alloy. And now imagine that scientific testing confirms the alloy is consistent with a composition that should not exist in 2016 under any documented circumstances. And now we begin to approach the realm of legendary coins, because history shows us that coins which challenge official mint records command extraordinary premiums because they force experts to reconsider what they know. And now let us imagine the surface and condition, because condition is everything. And while most error coins are discovered in circulation with damage, wear and corrosion, imagine that this particular coin somehow survives in near perfect condition. Perhaps it was struck and immediately caught in machinery, or discarded into a bin and later discovered by a mint employee who unknowingly preserved it, or perhaps it fell into a sealed bag and remained untouched for years, and when discovered it shows minimal wear, pristine surfaces and original mint luster, albeit on an unusual metal. And now we add another almost mythical element: provenance, because the value of a coin skyrockets when its history is documented. And imagine that this 2016 cent is accompanied by internal mint documentation or credible testimony showing that an unusual incident occurred on a specific day involving equipment malfunction, experimental materials, or die errors. And while the mint rarely releases such information, even partial confirmation could elevate the coin into a category beyond ordinary collectibles. And now imagine that when the coin is submitted for authentication, it undergoes extensive analysis using X-ray fluorescent scanning, electron microscopy, and metallurgical testing, and each test reveals something unprecedented, confirming that the coin is not altered, not counterfeit, not damaged after the fact, but genuinely struck by official mint equipment using materials and dies in a configuration never recorded before. And now consider the reaction of the numismatic community, because collectors live for discoveries like this, and when a coin appears that rewrites the textbooks, it attracts global attention. And now imagine that major grading services struggle to even label it because no standard CAT